Welcome to How We Work Now, where we explore how people are reshaping the modern workplace through lived experience with neurodiversity, chronic illness, and disability. Today I'm joined by Michael Osborne, founder and CEO of Accessible Me, where his mission is to remove digital barriers and build inclusive content and learning environments for everyone. Mike draws on his lived experience with hidden disabilities, including Tourette's, ADHD, and autism. He also brings a background in games technology and inclusive design, which he uses to build a workplace and client ecosystem that works differently. I'm excited to explore with him how his work is evolving and how design and mindset can create a more human-centered future of work. Hi, Mike. I'm so glad to have you here with us today. Please feel free to introduce yourself to our audience in your own words.
Fantastic. Well, as you've mentioned, I'm Mike Osborne and I'm the founder of Accessible Me. And our work is around removing barriers, whether digital or physical barriers, so that everyone can learn and kind of work with confidence. As you mentioned, I come from a kind of games technology background. When I was a young lad, I was absolutely inspired by the CGI and things like Toy Story and Jurassic Park, and I wanted to be an animator at Pixar. The dream was to move out. I did my GCSE work experience at a games company and thought actually the animation and games route is a valid way to go. And from there, I took part in a few game jams. Some of you might be familiar with the term hackathon, working with people you've never worked with before in a tight timeline, so that might be 24 hours, 48 hours. And all of these taught me basically how people interact with different systems. I describe myself as a neurodivergent cocktail. Some use the term neurospicy, not a term I'm particularly fond of. But yeah, my first as a kind of teenager, I was diagnosed with Tourette's, and I knew back then that I was more likely to have other diagnoses or other conditions, but didn't pursue that at the time. It was in my first role then where I had an autistic coach who saw that in me, and a couple of others in my team actually, and helped me pursue that. And it was much more recently that I discovered the ADHD branch as well, and having all these different pieces of the puzzle, kind of learning about myself, it has helped a lot. So for many years, I've struggled to fit into the way that the working world is designed or school systems. And I set up Accessible Me ultimately to fix the things that helped me back. I'm a parent of two neurodivergent children, and I want to make the world by the time they grow up more inclusive place. So working with organisations to design in a way that works for more people, including my kids when they grow up. My aim is simple: it's to make accessibility feel achievable to everyone rather than overwhelming. If you look at the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines or WCAG, so many people open those and go, oh, I don't even know where to start. We're here to kind of help you on that journey. So yeah, that's me. And thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Yeah, of course. So let's get right into it. Would you like to tell me a little bit more about your background specifically in games technology and how that led you into the accessibility space?
Sure. Well, I'll actually run the clock a little bit further. So when I was in the around year 3 or 4 at school, so probably around the age of 10 or 11, I was sat next to my best friend during an art class, and he drew this amazing picture of Scooby-Doo. And the next time I looked over, he'd colored Scooby in green. Now, not knowing anything about disabilities, not knowing that people see differently at the time, I kind of jokingly said, "Oh, what did you do that for?" In a playful way. And he got quite upset, and I felt terrible. I upset my best friend. And that's when I learned he was red-green colorblind. And that year for his birthday, I bought him a pack of pencils, Crayola pencils, and they have the name of the color printed on the side. So he knew Scooby should be brown. He just couldn't see the difference. And to this day, he says it's one of the most thoughtful gifts he's got. When I was studying for my course in my final year, I took part in one of those game jam hackathons I mentioned just now. And Aardman Animations, the people behind Wallace and Gromit and Chicken Run and some of those other films, they actually set the challenge of how many accessibility features can you work into your game within the 48 hours. And my team didn't win, but I was absolutely blown away by the team that did it, and it opened my eyes to how much could be done if you define and consider disability from the start. Um, I learned early on what inclusion feels like. I mentioned as a teenager was when my Tourette kicked in, and when you're going through body changes and everything else, to have Tourette's on top isn't exactly what you need. I did have people making comments, well-intended comments. They meant as compliments, but they'd say things like, oh, it must be so interesting to think like you do. And whilst they meant that in a positive way, it made me feel like here's the box that I'm in, and here's everyone else who thinks in the kind of the normal way. So kind of, and that felt very isolated. And it wasn't until much later in my career that that actually changed. So I'm very aware that when something isn't designed for you, if you look at color blindness and the games like Uno and Blockers and countless
Mm.
others, it can make you feel like you're the problem, which shouldn't be the place. When I studied games tech, it taught me that the kind of how we design that shapes behaviors. We as designers, when we choose that, or as a learning designer, for example, when we choose drag and drop to say this is how we're going to do the exercise, we can unintentionally put those barriers in place. And it's through my work throughout my career that I realized that a lack of accessibility isn't kind of due to bad intent most of the time. It's due to a lack of awareness. And that's why I do sessions like this, I do podcasts, I do training on the topic because I want to fix that. Accessibility is kind of my way of giving people that I did the tools that I didn't have as a teenager. I wish I did, and so I work with universities, schools, companies to help them bring that expertise in house. So awareness and supporting them on the journey.
I love that. Um, so in your journey from initial interest to actually founding Accessible Me, what were some of the biggest internal and external hurdles you personally faced in starting this business, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I was kind of fortunate in my career. When I was studying games technology, my aspiration was to make the next Assassin's Creed, and I couldn't get a placement or a job in the games industry because of lack of experience. So instead, I worked at a training company. They'd been doing classroom-based training since around 1989, and they were looking for help in how they were going to do what they do so well in the classroom and take that online. Initially, I saw that as a stepping stone. I wasn't going to stick around necessarily. I was going to build the experience. But when I saw the impact of what we do has on people, I was kind of hooked on that approach. Now, I've learned the hard way that you have to design your work around the person and not force the person to cope. Many examples in my career kind of allude to those days where I might have a hyper focusing and get loads done, but I might have another day where I struggle to so much as get started. And there are tools now like ChatGPT where if I do hit a creative block, I can go, hey, give me some ideas. And even though I might not use those ideas, it's great to go, no, I don't like that, actually, but here are the things that can be done. I use things like routines. So in front of me, I've got my monthly planner, my weekly planner, my daily planner, and my to-do list. Those things kind of keep me honest, or at least try and keep me on task. Um, with my autism and the ADHD, the autistic side of me kind of loves that routine and structure and predictable workflows because they can keep me steady. And then I've got the ADHD though that can go, oh, new and shiny. Let me just check the LinkedIn for that dopamine hit, and can send me down a rabbit hole. Things in my career like when I before I had my own business putting things through my manager was particularly helpful. So previously, I'd have people message me on Teams or Slack, going, "Hi, Mike, can I just pick your brain for a few minutes? They might need help on things like Excel or anything technical, which I was particularly good at with my logic kind of thinking." And whilst that was what good, sometimes I'd lose quite a bit of time to helping other people and not having enough to kind of help myself. So another one I'd say would be being open about my needs. I built Accessible Me to my business around kind of working with my brain, not against it. I try and focus on energy rather than hours. So I do things like if it's a nice day, I will walk my daughter to school and back because I do find the exercise helps. And I build downtime in because burnout helps no one. Burnout is ultimately why I left my previous job and I'm still on that journey, to be honest. But honesty around my barriers, my boundaries, and things like that, those have made things better. And I find therapy and kind of being more open with my challenges has actually helped people help me. Now I know people with disabilities or neurodivergence can be a sensitive topic. I would say the more you can speak about it, the better, but there's no pressure on anyone to only share what you feel comfortable with. Because if you, there's no point kind of feeling like you have to diagnose if you feel any kind of discrimination or anything else, you have to feel comfortable. That psychological safety has to be there.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think as society, we have such a focus on hours worked and working the 40-hour work
Yes,
week when
too
a
much on
lot of studies have shown
KPIs.
that 40 hours aren't necessarily the most efficient, and working based on hours alone isn't necessarily the best way to gauge productivity or efficacy. And I've definitely
Absolutely.
found that focusing on energy over hours has really helped me as well. So I love that insight. Let's see. How have your lived experiences with ADHD, anxiety, autism shaped the systems and structures that you've built around your workplace in accessible me?
Well, it's a great question. So my experiences have kind of shaped it in a variety of ways. So certainly when I've been sat in a room sometimes where people have been showing me something and apparently I have a face, and they go, oh, is there a problem? And I was like, yeah, the alignment isn't correct, and they go, yeah, it is, and then they zoom in to about 400% and they see there's a couple of pixels out. So there are things like that which where my kind of things like my OCD can be helpful, but actually I try and design everything I do around clarity, kind of predictability, and ease. Now, if you think about the content accessibility guidelines, should be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. The trying to design around the clarity and predictability helps with that understandable aspect. I try and reduce overwhelm where I can with step-by-step processes. So rather, even though I might give a lengthy answer or a lengthy document, I'll try and give us a summary as well. And if I can make that an ordered list, I will do that. I like to use things like plain English, so using the Flesch Kincaid reading score and aim to write around the age of a 12-year-old because if I can do that, that not only helps people with dyslexia, it helps people who don't have English as a first language, for example. It makes sign translation easier. It makes a whole host of things easier. So I value plain English because I it helps me. So avoiding metaphors where possible, and I understand that most barriers are in place accidentally, so that try makes me, when I'm designing, patient with the people I'm speaking to. I'm not there to rip people apart or to make them overwhelmed. I try and keep my advice practical and human when helping others.
I love that. I think there's a lot of fear around being accessible and doing it right, not doing anything
Yeah,
wrong or offending people. And it's very important to be considerate of others, but I think, also giving yourself grace that you're doing the best you can and working to make improvements where you can is
absolutely.
really.
I think there's something called like action paralysis. And if you imagine, being the CEO of a company like Walmart, you might have the best intent in the world to make it an inclusive place to work or an inclusive place for your shoppers. Um, but you might not take action because if you slip up and use ableist language or something else, that becomes newsworthy. Oh, CEO at Walmart thinks this, and I think we need to be kind on people. We need to recognize that, look, we're all on this journey. We're not going to get it right. And by actually saying, look, I'm just starting out of this. I don't know as much as you do. But here are the things I am doing. And here's when I'm going to do it by. Just having those conversations are going to help you.
Right, I love that. So, can you give an example of a system or process you've built at Accessible Me that exemplifies work designed around a person rather than people having to adapt to the work?
Sure. So we've got a couple. We have a 6 week onboarding model, which is designed to kind of break up big complex topics into small steps. As part of that kind of starter journey, what we do is we offer 4 different options. It might be a one-to-one coaching conversation with leadership. It might be allyship or escape room experience, which puts people in a real world kind of empathy type scenario. We might look at some work that they've designed, or developed or brought in house and give them feedback on that. Or you might do a training session. Now, we don't like to make assumptions on what people need to do. Therefore, we have those kind of four options. And ultimately, it's kind of one simple thing to help people get started without fear. So rather than kind of having to worry about, "Oh, I'm going to get signed up into this monthly or yearly thing," no commitment, it's just a step on the ladder because doing something is going to be helpful or not. Allyship, our escape room, is one of those playful, gamified ways we try and do that. So it brings is a gamified empathy lab that builds empathy of the disability, the barriers, not the disabilities. I'd say, you can't just put on a pair of glasses and go, "Oh, I know what it's like to have tunnel vision." No, like you have the option to take those off. By you simulate you understand what the barriers are, yes, but not the lived experience. So I kind of try and build empathy and not shame. And ultimately, yeah, is a lot of it centered around my work routine. So structured days, clear priorities, and kind of communication with as kind of being as concise as I possibly can be.
That's really interesting. So the escape rooms, are you saying you have escape rooms with puzzles to solve that replicate or mimic the barriers that different disabled people might face?
Absolutely. We have different stations. So we have things that simulate cognitive disabilities, vision, hearing, even verbal. So if people are non-verbal or have a stutter, we have different stations. And ultimately, I start with things that get people excited. So they walk into the room and they see things like the Rubik's Cube or these puzzles, and they go, "Oh, we're going to be playing games and stuff like that." And then when I get them to put on some glasses, which may simulate a particular kind of color blindness, and some of those oranges that look like reds, suddenly you can't see the difference, and they disappear. Or you may have put on our arthritis simulating gloves, and it's interesting how if you're wearing colorblind simulating glasses or the gloves, both of those make those puzzles difficult to start with. Now, we start with puzzles and things that get people excited, and then whilst they're wearing the gloves, I might say, "Oh, what's there? Could you just button your shirt?" And then so they might do something which people do every day, to make it more real world, and they struggle, and then I might go, "Okay, if you're enjoying the experience, do you want to write about it on your phone whilst we're doing the gloves?" And then they're using a device they use every single day, and they feel that, "Oh, that's quite painful, that's quite uncomfortable in my hand," and things like that. So um, I try and start with this abstract experience and then relate every station back to work. And I always say that the experience you have during allyship or escape room isn't what matters. What matters is the discussion you have around it. How can we remove the barriers for our colleagues? How can we make the events we do as marketers more inclusive to people? Even things to, if people get overwhelmed by sensory needs, not opening that smelly tuna sandwich or next to your colleagues who might be wearing the noise cancelling headphones, for example, because they may have additional sensory needs. There's a whole host of things, and it's really an awareness course which is accelerated, but it's going to be far, far more effective than, a webinar or something passive, because you've experienced it yourself. And I think there's no greater substitute than experience.
I love that. You're really highlighting all the little things that we take for granted when we don't have a
Absolutely.
particular disability that you don't even think about unless you can't do it anymore. And then, it's a lot bigger issue,
And
clear
to your,
clear to see when you're
and to,
actually experiencing it.
and to your point around not being able to do it more, as we get older, we are likely to have reduced kind of vision, reduced hearing, and reduced mobility in our hands. Our governments keep on raising the working age. So you're likely to, before you retire, to have some kind of disability. And even if you stop listening to today's podcast, you might trip over and break your arm and you have a temporary disability. Or you might be listening or watching, a video recording of this and have glare on your screen, a situational disability. So one of the things I'd like you to remember, or if you're listening or watching this, is accessible design is better design. The electric toothbrush is one of those things that was designed to help people with limited mobility, and I used every single day. So that's kind of one of the takeaways. Accessible design benefits everyone.
Right. Because everyone is, one accident, one circumstance away from potentially being disabled. I know I broke my foot last Friday,
Fantastic.
so I'm dealing with sudden lack of mobility myself. So yeah, I love the idea, accessible design isn't just better for, disabled people who need accessible design, but for everybody using the designs because it makes it easier
Absolutely.
for the entire community. All right. So, are there particular tools, habits, or boundaries that have made a big difference in your working life and, how things run for your employees at Accessible Me?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. There's an app I discovered recently called Momentum is a Chrome plugin, and what Momentum does is every time you might be tempted to go down that rabbit hole of I'm just going to check LinkedIn to do. With Momentum, at the start of the day, you can plug in these are my objectives for today. And when you open the new browser or whatever else, it goes, this is your objective. Is this going to help you? Now, it doesn't stop you doing it. It's not making you feel like a job. It's just that reminder of, hey, this is what you're currently working on to do. And that is one thing that's massively helpful for me. In my workplace, I try to keep the Scrum type thing, which is a part of the agile methodology. So in the morning, I would meet with my wife and say, "Here are the things I plan on doing today." We get to lunchtime, and she goes, "How are you getting on, Mike?" And I might go, "Fantastic. I've had a really productive morning." And she might ask, "Okay, did you have you done what you set out to do?" And I'm kind of smiling sheepishly then because yes, I had a really productive morning, but it isn't what I set out to do. So things like my planners, things like Momentum, and tools like that have been great. I would say to anyone who is neurodivergent, do be careful following these productivity leaders who might go, "Oh, Pomodoro, time chunking and stuff like that." 'Cause that might not work for us. But where I would say it can work for me or has been helpful is when I block out my calendar, yes, I might go off task, but seeing, the meeting thing pop up going, hey, you said you're going to work on this now, can be a helpful prompt. So I do stick a lot in my calendars to remind me to do stuff that I need to do. And the final one on that would be AI note-taking tools. They have been a lifesaver for me.
Yeah, I love the Momentum app you mentioned. It sounds like it could be really useful for people who struggle with focus or have ADHD and similar
Yeah.
issues. Um, so speaking of technology and how it can be helpful, what roles do you think technology in digital design play in reinforcing and breaking down accessibility and work barriers?
Well, I think digital design can kind of either include people or exclude people at scale. So we're in the AI age now. Tools like ChatGPT becoming prominent, and they really do have the potential to make things more inclusive. But we need to be factoring in those things from the start because when you look at what's training these tools, a lot of us or a lot of people with disabilities or other skin conditions or different skin colors or race or religion, especially when that intersectionality comes in, a lot of us weren't part of the conversation that's feeding these models. So we need to be mindful that when we're writing the prompts, you might actually have to explicitly tell your engine, your search engine, or your GPT, I'd like you to be extra mindful for people with disabilities. I'd like you to hit the WACAG 2.2 criteria. A small decision can kind of can block 1,000 people. So choosing to do a drag and drop exercise or choosing to have steps into your venue, particularly if your steps and ramp don't have a cover, for example. So you get a snowy day and suddenly that barrier, that ramp that was inclusive before is now icy. Like just so uh, things like including a cover or shelter would have been good. So yeah, ultimately my takeaway would be that good design creates dignity, confidence, and independence. If we can create an environment where people don't have to ask because they can do it themselves. That's what this is around. And the future of work depends on accessible digital systems. And if designing it for work isn't enough, then it really can be life or death. Imagine kind of being in your moment of need, considering taking your own life or something like that, and then the digital system, those Samaritan tools or anything else not being accessible or not being able to contact your GP because your device isn't working. These things really do matter. It's not a case of, yeah, should we do this, should we not? It's it's human rights at the end of the day. We should all have a right to access everything, and yeah, and that. Hopefully, you get my motivations for in doing this.
Yeah, I do. I think that's a really good point. I've never thought of kind of suicide helplines and the like not being accessible to the people that could, really need them the most since when you're dealing with all these barriers, it's easy to have more mental health issues as well as physical health issues. And so trying to get the
Yeah,
last ditch effort to help and it's not accessible, it's
an
just
example might be
horrible.
an example might be if I have like a severe speech impediment, like a stutter, or I might be non-verbal. To say, oh, just phone this helpline isn't going to help me. I might need text-based communication. I might need an alternative method. So, just factor that in when you're designing how something should be done.
Yes. So speaking of how things should be done and the cultural societal expectations we have in place around so many different things, in your view, what parts of these, pieces of modern work culture need to change, especially for people with disabilities, neurodivergence, or non-traditional working styles?
So, I think we need to kind of remove the burden of on, like when you join a job, having to speak to HR about what you need. Now you are the expert on you, and I'm not saying that shouldn't be a conversation had, but we live in a world now with the chat GPTs, with all this information on the web, and there is more we can do as leaders in an organization to do that little bit of research instead. So where at the moment you might go to an event or a website and it might say, "Do you have any accessibility needs?" Where imagine flipping that on its head and going, "Here's here's um here's our menu of things we can offer. So by default, we can have closed captions available to you in these languages. Would you like to turn them on? You might be a stay-at-home mum, or you might be opposite your partner who's taking that all-important work call and you really need to do your e-learning. You might go, yes, please. You might not have a disability, but you're still going to benefit from it. So thinking things like, here's a menu of the things we can offer. What would you be interested in? It comes back to what I was saying earlier. We create a system of dignity. People don't have to say, I have a disability. We're just given the options of, here are things I can turn on. I can customize my experience. So I'd say a future where people don't have to mask to survive at work is one of those aspects. A future where the systems flex from people's needs. So being able to change the text and the background color, it would be quite a basic one, for example. Um, a future where accessibility is normal and not niche. So I'm going to keep on going until I'm redundant. But I know that seems an odd aspiration, but I strive for a world where companies like mine aren't needed, but we're a long way off at the moment. Um, and ultimately, a future where inclusion is designed from the start, because the earlier you do this, the more money you're going to save, and therefore, it doesn't have to be these costly fixes. If you can do it right from the start, you're going to save an absolute fortune.
I love that. And that perspective of, having accommodations available to everyone, I think is especially helpful because among the disabled community, no matter what level of disability people have, there's a lot of, I'm not disabled enough to deserve
Yes.
this accommodation. I'm not, sick enough to even call myself disabled. Or I know when I was dealing with really severe joint issues a couple of years ago and I was using a wheelchair or a walker intermittently to get around, I felt terribly guilty. I feel like I wasn't injured enough. I wasn't completely paralyzed. So it was wrong of me to use these things, even though if I didn't have them, I wouldn't have been able to go out and do anything at all because my hips were not in a position to be able to carry me. And so
Yeah.
I've never considered that perspective before of, making accessibility for everyone because then disabled people don't have to have that thought in the back of their head of, oh, am I disabled enough? Because it's for everybody. And it also,
Yeah,
I think,
imagine a
would help
world.
with the feelings of isolation that comes with being disabled. If it's just something for everybody, then you're not standing out for using an accommodation.
I totally agree. We shouldn't have to get to the venue early to get the seat at the front so I can actually see the slides or actually hear the person speaking. Ultimately we should all have the kind of the same rights to to engage as anyone else. Not to get there early because I need to get the only accessible seat. But to have tables that can adjust so I can stand if I need or have a higher chair. All of these things are going to make a difference. So, and accessibility is a journey. It's one of those things you you're never going to finish it because there's always more you could add. You could add more languages. You could add sign languages. There's always things you could be doing, but just start somewhere and add to that, and you'll be amazed at how rewarding that feels once you get started.
I love that. So on to our next big question. How do you get senior leadership and stakeholders to shift from the classic productivity at all costs kind of mindset to working towards well-designed workplaces that fit all kinds of diverse people?
I think data is a good one. If you take the fact that 10% of the population have dyslexia and that 1 in 12 men and 1 in 200 women are colorblind, even with most boards, which are pretty much, nine, if there's ten people in the board, nine are probably going to be male, then there's a good chance that one of you or multiple of you are going to have a disability. Um, Obviously that board setup needs to change, but what I'd say is start small. Just by starting somewhere, you're going to make a big difference. And what I would say to accessibility um, is things like if I asked you the question, how much would it mean to your business to feature higher on Google? You're probably going to sit up and listen. But the way Google indexes the websites is that they send out crawlers which check out all the content on your website. Now, those little bots, they are deaf and they are blind. They can't see your content and they can't hear it. So by having the accessible alternatives, the text, the transcripts, the closed captions, the alternative text on your images, can you make your website not only more inclusive to people with disabilities, you actually help the search engine find your website. Now, Instagram, LinkedIn, all these platforms are starting to move away from hashtags to help you find what you need towards actually looking at that alt text to get them to make sure they provide better results. There's a notion in the disability space of nothing for us without us. So I would say ask your people what you need, but try and research it if you can. If you can say, based on our research, these are the things we think. Does this align with you? You can get buy-in that way because you're also giving people an opportunity to say, no, that doesn't work for me. I need this. But um, you're not kind of forcing people to educate you on things that might be quite sensitive. I'd say don't fear losing control. The more open you are to say, look, to be honest, I don't know how to help you, but I'd love to invite you to help me. It's going to build that trust that that they're going to be listened to. And if we can make work simple, predictable, and human, you don't need to know everything. You just need to start. And our work with Accessible Me isn't around getting every single person to the top of the ladder because I don't think that's achievable. Our work at Accessible Me is even if you're yet to take your first step on the accessibility ladder or you're near the top, we just want to help you get a couple of steps up from where you are, because the ripple effect of being mindful to it and making those changes, that's potentially huge. So just start somewhere.
I love that. What was that phrase you said? Nothing for or without us?
Yeah, so it's nothing for us without us. So what
Nothing
that's
for us.
saying is, the best people to design for wheelchair users, for example, isn't somebody who has never used a wheelchair in their life. It's somebody who uses a wheelchair every single day. Now, whilst it's not a disability example, if you go on YouTube and search, racist soap dispenser, you'll see that if a white individual puts their hand under some of these soap dispensers, it releases the soap. And if a black individual or someone with darker skin puts their hand under, it doesn't release the soap. And the reason for that is because the darker skin doesn't reflect the light in the same way in the same way. And the reason that's happened is because the people with darker skin were missing from the test groups, but more so than that, they were missing in the design groups. So, like if they were a part of the design, they would have thought to make sure that somebody in the testing group was part of it. And that's true for anything. It's true for disabilities. If we are designing a big event and you've not consulted people who are deaf, whether they have any accessibility needs or neurodivergent or blind, then you're potentially missing a trick. And those tricks you miss could end up costing you thousands later on. So, have those conversations early, um, be upfront with where you are, and you're going to save yourself thousands and you're going to have a better product. If people go on your website and they see people that look like them, people with vitiligo or people with a limb difference, they're going to be so much more likely to want to join your team or to spend their hard-earned money with you because, hey, that looks like me. Like that, don't underestimate the power of that.
I love that. So let's move on to some more reflection on the future. How do you stay hopeful, motivated, and resilient when facing setbacks in the accessibility state or space, or when work culture changes feel slow or halted? I know with the political climate right now, accessibility doesn't feel like it's making particular progress at the
Yeah.
moment sometimes.
It can be quite demoralizing. We To be transparent with the exit from this journey, we did have a quieter summer. It's always going to be quiet in the training space, but normally we'd be busy with auditing over the summer. And obviously when you're running a business and you're a parent and you've got mouths to feed, all of those things can be quite concerning. But I think celebrate the wins. No win is too small, and for me, I've always said, look, it's not about making millions, although who wouldn't want to, that'd be nice. For me, it's about helping millions. When I'm on my deathbed, I can't take those millions I make with me anyway. But if I can look back and have helped millions through, you know, doing people who might be listening to the podcast who feel inspired and might go away and make two or three changes, those those wins are significant. Hearing the feedback from the people I've helped or the people I've inspired is another one. And but the what I would say is in terms of resilience, uh, one of the overlooked parts with kind of accessibility is the mental health aspect and depression, especially when severe enough, can be actually fall under a disability. It's protected under the UK Equality Act, and in the States, unless leadership changes things, whilst you haven't had the European Accessibility Act, which comes into effect in June this year, you should have ADA, the Americans with Disability Act Title II, coming into effect in April 2026. And ultimately, whilst yes, some companies are scaling back, please don't panic too much on that. One of the things that's been more important than ever in terms of this consumerism type world we live in is things like influencers. And when you get artists like Lewis Capaldi, who comes out and speaks around his Tourette's, or you know, or things like TripAdvisor, if we see that these big organizations have made an accessibility faux pas, they haven't had the support in place, um, you might get a pass. But if you make that same challenge or same mistake a year from now and you've done nothing, you know, this is going to rub up people the wrong way, and you're gonna lose customers, you're gonna lose staff, and ultimately, what I'd say is those who look at accessibility now, if you go back a couple of years ago, in terms of recycling, you you may be laughed out of the building if you said 10 years from now there's going to be a recycling bin in every building. Um, Yet today, that's almost a standard thing, and you ridicule the person who dare put the apple or crisp packet in the plastic bin or the paper waste. Do you know? I really do think accessibility is going to be that next big wave. If you're seen to be ignorantly choosing things that we know aren't accessible, then there's going to be a problem, and it's only a matter of time before you start to see more and more of that online.
Oh, that you're kind of keeping up hope even when things don't feel hopeful because the future's going to come anyways and we can still make positive change. So
Absolutely.
one last question. Let's try to keep this, you know, quick 2-minute answer
Mhm.
to land on a hopeful note. What kind of future of work do you hope we're collectively building towards, specifically when it comes to disability, neurodivergence, and chronic illness?
I'm going to the accessibility menu, being able to offer things in advance. So the future of work I aspire to, if you imagine a young black woman who's already got the odds against her just because of the color of her skin and the gender she was born with, now imagine she was on holiday in the Ukraine and she got injured unfortunately in the bombing. Now she's got damage to her sight, her hearing, and maybe even a limb difference. You'd think with all that intersectionality, that the odds are really stacked against this individual. Now, the future of work I'm certainly trying to work towards is there should be no reason why that individual couldn't be the CEO of the number one FTSE 500 company. Now, when you stop and go, okay, what needs to change to get there? Society needs to change. And yeah, that one is a massive beast to slay. Um, but we need to do better than just the the training on diversity and inclusion of being inclusive? How about the managerial training? How about becoming a leader? Is that inclusive as well? Is that accessible? It should be, so everything from going on the website and seeing people who look like me, um, going on the website and knowing that if I apply, um, rather than the required fields being the name, email address, and phone number, to be able to say, hey, I'm not providing my phone number because if you call me and I'm deaf, I'm not going to be able to have that same conversation. But I can do a call. I could do a video call where I could have the transcript and follow along. So please don't exclude me because I have a lot to offer. It is the future of the workplace is one where we go, these are the things that we can do as a provider. We're always going to be adding to that list, not taking away because of budgets, and certainly not taking away because of people in power for 4 years of time. Like it's a world where look, we can bring our authentic selves to the table, not to mask, and that might be race, it might be religion, it might be anything else, but we all have things to say, and we should be able to show up, show out, and yeah, make it a more inclusive place for everyone.
I love that. Thank you so much, Mike, for coming on the show today and sharing your story and your experiences working with accessibility and making things more accessible with people. I think your knowledge and expertise is invaluable here.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with everyone before we wrap up?
Just a reminder that accessibility is a journey. It's not a pass or fail test. Most exclusion, however that looks, is accidental. So when people understand the barriers that others face, they will design with more care, and that makes it better for everyone. So just end on that note, progress over perfection. Um, be rather than thinking you need a big Trojan horse, I need to make this massive change. Be a Trojan mouse. Make small changes in your design, and the ripple effect will be huge.
I love that. Well, thanks again for coming on. Mike, I hope you had a great time being interviewed. I had a great time interviewing you. And for all our viewers, I hope you enjoyed our episode today and gained some helpful knowledge. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having me.